Loading hot takes in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back into TwinTakes Fantasy Football. Today's actually a pretty good day. Just finished watching a different kind of football. It's a little bit more popular across the pond, and as a staunch Arsenal supporter, it's been a rough couple years, but after a few key moves this offseason, we're looking in really great form and very excited for the rest of the season. But back to the football that you guys came here for, NFL football, and we're talking about sleepers. Yes, the biggest buzzword in all of fantasy football. There's even a platform named after it. No hate though. I love Sleeper. It's a fantastic platform. I run a lot of my leagues on it. Hashtag not a sponsor. But today we're talking about some of those sleepers where the hype train is just way out of control. The ADP is rising way too much for me to stomach, and they just need to go back to bed because drafting them at their current ADP is going to absolutely tank your entire team and your season. So these are 5 sleepers that need to go back to bed, and the first one's going to be a super hot take here. And the first sleeper that needs to put on his PJs and slip back under the covers is Gabe Davis. Okay, I heard that raucous boos coming from everywhere around me, but I'm going to explain why I'm not in on Gabe Davis. His ADP is just way too much to stomach right now. If we're looking at some of the quote-unquote pro leagues or best ball leagues, he's creeping up into the 6th, even the 5th round, and I cannot bring myself to invest that kind of draft capital into him, and that's honestly because the production really hasn't been in there except for the playoffs of last season, and I'll explain why playoffs versus regular season is much different, but if we're talking about strictly regular season statistics for Gabe Davis, he only had one game in 2021 that was over 16 points. He really didn't have a tremendous amount of production over the course of last regular season. So a lot of what we're seeing here isn't based on past production, it's based on projections. And I'm more of a believer in historical performance rather than hypotheticals here. So the one game over 16 points is a huge red flag for me. Also, as far as production goes, he had 4 games with 0 targets in 2021. Not 0 catches, 0 targets. That is also a massive red flag, especially when you have one of the best quarterbacks in all of NFL in Josh Allen, who spreads the ball around a lot, who threw for over 4,000 yards, and to get 0 targets, that's very concerning. Also, people are saying, listen, there's a ton of vacated targets between Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley. It's 172 targets in total that have been vacated, but that number in and of itself, I think, is quite inflated and not actually accurate. One of the main reasons is Stephon Diggs had a really, really down year as far as Stephon Diggs standards goes. I'm really in on the Stephon Diggs bounce back. Go see 5 wide receivers to win you your fantasy league, but those 172 targets, mostly the 100 targets that went to Emmanuel Sanders, really came at the detriment to Stephon Diggs. I think Stephon Diggs really assumes a lot of those targets, and that 172 number is really inflated. So we're looking at potentially, if in an average year, that it would be maybe like 130, 140 targets that were vacated rather than this almost 200 targets. So I think just as far as people saying, 172 targets, Gabe Davis' production is going to go way up, I just think that's completely a misrepresentation of what the actual offense is up there in Buffalo. Furthermore, there's a new offensive coordinator in Buffalo. Brian Daboll is gone. So people are saying, look at the playoffs last year. Look at how he was utilized down the stretch. That's not guaranteed to continue. The offense is going to be different. I understand that the new OC is an internal hire. However, there's no rhyme or reason as to why he would continue the exact same strategy and play calling as Brian Daboll. They're two different people. They have two different opinions on how the play should be run. And I just don't think you can really take a one-to-one representation of the play last year and convert it to this year with the change in leadership over there at the offensive coordinator position. I've said this ad nauseum, but vacated targets go to the running back, not the wide receiver. We already talked about how the 170 vacated targets was a really inflated number and not accurate to the total proportion of vacated targets in that offense, assuming that Stephon Diggs has a normal year. And they literally brought in James Cook, who is a pass-catching back. That's his primary role, and I don't think it's completely out of left field to say a lot of those vacated targets are going to go to a running back, James Cook, who they drafted specifically for that purpose. Also, speaking of pass-catching backs, Devin Singletary, another person who had a tremendous stretch of production down the end of 2021 was Devin Singletary. Over the last, course of the season, he was a top 5 back, which is unheard of. Most people don't think of him as that, but he had tremendous production, definitely filling in as that pass-catching role and really earned the number 1 spot there in the Buffalo backfield. So I think keep it consistent. If you're going to, hype up Gabe Davis because of his increased production over the stretch, that argument should definitely apply to Devin Singletary, and I still think Devin Singletary is going to be massively utilized come the start of this season. So just keep it consistent. Keep the arguments consistent. I can't, have good faith in Gabe Davis if the same exact argument's not being applied to the same exact player in the same exact situation down the stretch of last year, which was Devin Singletary. And my final point is people are saying, well, look at the playoff production. Look at how he was in the playoffs. Yeah, but playoff football is so much different than regular season football. There's a whole different strategy. There's a whole different play calling. There's a whole different way games are run, and the quality of opponents is higher. You're going to have to put up more points. Historically, the playoffs average a touchdown more in points per game than regular season. So taking playoff production and putting it 1-to-1 to regular season doesn't really make sense in my mind. And for all those reasons, I'm really staying away from Gabe Davis in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. I think it's just way too high. There's so many better options to take. For example, Rashad Bateman is in this range. Elijah Moore, I would much rather take over Gabe Davis. In this current draft, it's the 7-10. Like I said, there's other drafts where he probably will go higher. If he's falling to the 9th round in your home leagues, then I feel comfortable with it. But, I'm looking for guys that have true wide receiver 1 upside in their respective offenses rather than Gabe Davis here. So let's move on to the second guy that needs to start setting his alarms and crawling back under the covers as well, and that's Russell Gage. And I've seen his ADP drop in recent weeks, which, is good. I'm glad it's coming down from its historic highs that it was when he first got signed by the Buccaneers. But I still seem to see that there's a lot of love floating around in the fantasy community for Russell Gage, and I think wasting a draft pick on him is going to really ruin your fantasy team. I would go so far as to say that you should be leaving your draft. Even if Russell Gage is available in the last pick of the last round, don't take him. Don't even take that flyer on him. There's much more players with upside that you can certainly take in that range. Here he goes up in the 10th round, but I've seen people reach for him a little bit higher as well. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. First off, Russell Gage, it's not the first time that he's been talked about and hyped up prior to a season. He's been a fantasy darling with, tons of other seasons in the past, especially last year with Julio Jones leaving. There's a lot of, Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage is going to step up and take that next leap as a wide receiver 2 in the Atlanta offense, and it just never materialized. He hasn't really brought that consistent fantasy production to any of the teams he's been a part of. It's hard for me to come back to the well over and over and over again saying this year is a year for Russell Gage, this year's Russell Gage, when he's so much past the year of a wide receiver breakout age-wise and experience-wise. Historically, we've seen the year 3 breakout for wide receivers. In recent years, that timetable has been stepped up a little bit. Year 2 breakout, that's why I'm super high on Devontae Smith this year. But this is Russell Gage's 5th year in the NFL, and it hasn't happened. And I don't think that, after 4 years, and he wasn't playing with a horrible quarterback. Matt Ryan's a great quarterback. He sustained wide receiver 1 production for Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Roddy White, a ton of these guys. Like, he's sustained a lot of fantasy relevant assets. And if he can do it for Russell Gage, then I don't think that, banking on the 5th time's the charm for the breakout for Russell Gage, I don't think it's going to be this year. Furthermore, he is going to be stuck behind a ton of options in that Buccaneers offense. Mike Evans, I'm obviously super high on him. He's going to be the wide receiver 1. Godwin, his timetable from the ACL has actually been stepped up. He should be ready to go early in the season. And there's no way Russell Gage outranks Godwin or Evans, who are both more talented than Gage and have a better rapport with Tom Brady. Julio Jones is in there as well. And then plus you have Rachaad White and Leonard Fournette to catch passes out of the backfield. Cameron Brate, Kyle Rudolph. There's a ton of tight ends in that rotation. Even if Gronk doesn't come back, I know he's retired. He could come back, but there's just so many options and so much, so many pieces of the pie that I don't think Russell Gage will be able to find a big enough piece to be fantasy relevant. And listen, Tom Brady is the GOAT of quarterbacks, and much as it pains me to say that, he is, as far as production, longevity, whatever metrics you want to use, he is the best quarterback of all time. However, Ryan wasn't that bad of a quarterback. It's not like he's coming from Daniel Jones as his quarterback. Like I said previously, Ryan sustained a ton of fantasy relevant pieces, and even with Ryan at quarterback and a ton of opportunity, much more opportunity than he's having in this offense, he had 3 games last year with 0 targets. That is a major red flag. Games was absolutely not even 0 catches, but 0 targets. Definitely a red flag when it comes to my wide receivers. And just the last thing I want to mention here, I don't want to get too speculative and, get away from statistics, but there's been a lot of offseason turmoil for Tampa Bay. Tom Brady's missing from training camp, and no one knows if it was, pre-requested or if it's a spur. I mean, he might retire again. He tried to force a move to the Dolphins. He quote unquote forced Bruce Arians out of the offense. There's just like a lot of stuff going on with the Buccaneers, and it definitely, a lot of outside distractions makes me want to stay away from that offense just a little bit. So yeah, Russell Gage, I think, is going to do a lot more harm to your team than good this year. Moving on, another sleeper that needs to go back to bed. Going back to the 7th round, we're talking about Tony Pollard. Listen, the hype around Tony Pollard, his efficiency metrics, how well he's played last year, I get it. The statistics are there, but let's look at some other statistics that are actually more relevant to fantasy, in my opinion. First, there's a severe O-line downgrade. Both Lyle Collins and Connor Williams have left, and this offensive line has plummeted, I believe, like 9 or 10 spots in the PFF grades. That is a significant downturn as far as offensive line grades, and we've seen how much benefit the Cowboys running backs have reaped because of running behind from a good offensive line. Think back to DeMarco Murray when he had that amazing season, 2014, 2015. I don't know the exact year, but he was the leading rusher in that year, left for Philadelphia, never was the same player. And people speculated that a lot of his production came because he was allowed such great running lanes and such great protection behind that offensive line. And for his, as much hate as Zeke gets, he's an Iron Man. He does not miss games. Yes, he's been suspended, but hopefully coming into his 5th, 6th year in the league, he has matured quite a bit. And he's only missed one game in his entire career. If you can believe that, go back, fact check me. I know this for a fact. I know it doesn't seem true, but he's only missed one game in his entire career due to injury. So he is an Iron Man. I don't expect Tony Pollard. I'm not going to bet on injury for Zeke. I understand he's older. Injury is always a possibility, but I hate betting on injury to happen. So I just don't think that as long as Zeke can continue this run of health up, Pollard will always be the number 2 back behind Zeke. And speaking of, he will always be the number 2 back. Even if he is outproducing him and by efficiency metrics, Zeke has a $100 million contract. They aren't going to abandon him. Jerry Jones loves Zeke. Mike McCarthy loves Zeke. He's the face of the franchise. And there's something to be said for someone that really is, synonymous with the fans, synonymous with AT&T and the Cowboys, and who has, the most commercials for the Cowboys over the past few years. So just by his popularity alone and what they have invested into Zeke, they're not going to abandon him. On Jerry Jones' weekly radio show, he said Zeke is going to be the focal point of this offense. Okay, even if Zeke is averaging less than 3 yards per carry, which is worse than Trent Williams a few years ago, he will still be part of this offense. They're still going to run through him. He's just synonymous with the Cowboys at this point. Again, he's going to be stuck behind Zeke, and last year, yes, he had some good games where he got a touchdown, but for the most part, half of those games, he couldn't sustain really relevant fantasy production, where he had 11 games under 10 points last year, which is abysmal for a running back. I don't want any of my running backs having single-digit points. And finally, I will just say, I don't think last year he did benefit by Dak was a little bit skittish coming off the ankle injury. There's a lot of dump offs to Tony Pollard. I remember very vividly in the Thanksgiving game, he had 2 dump offs for touchdowns to Tony Pollard. But Dak's going to have his confidence back. He's going to scramble a little bit more. Mike McCarthy's come out and said he's going to be a running QB much more this year. They're going to utilize his legs, which really does eliminate the pass catching ability that Tony Pollard, that's his biggest upside that he brings to the table. So that's going to eliminate it. Dak is going to be more likely to scramble rather than dump it off or check it down, which does cut out a good portion of Mr. Pollard's production. So avoiding him, there's a lot more running backs that I would love to take instead of Pollard. I'm really high on Dameon Pierce, really high on Tyler Algier. So I'm much rather taking these rookie running backs that have the ability to step up into the RB1 position on their teams rather than someone who's going to be stuck behind in an RB2 position in Tony Pollard, who's also on the older side. So number 4 is going to be a hot take for the fantasy community at large, but if you know me by now, if you've watched some of these videos, probably not surprising. I'm pretty down on the Broncos this season as a whole, and it's going to be up in the 4th round, Jerry Jeudy. In this current draft. He's drafted in the 412 spot. I've seen him go a little bit higher. I've seen him slipped a little bit more. But right here on the 4th to 5th round, there's a lot more wide receivers that I prefer over Jerry Jeudy. And for a multitude of reasons, which I'll now proceed to go over. First off, he's injury prone. He hasn't really escaped a single of these 2 seasons that he's been a part of without injury. He missed a significant portion of last season with injury. And, the best ability is availability, and he hasn't proven that he has that yet. So not only is he injury prone, there's just, if he misses time, then obviously the production, they have enough wide receivers, enough other options there in the Broncos to spread it around and basically make sure he feels not missed in the offense. So secondly, in addition to not being on the field and giving himself an opportunity to accrue points, he hasn't really done much even when he's been on the field. Last year, not a single game over 12 points. As I mentioned before with some of the other fantasy sleepers here, I bet on production. I want to see a history of production. I don't want to make my picks based solely on projection, and I cannot waste a top 4th round pick or a 5th round pick on someone who hasn't produced in the 2 years they've been in the NFL, especially a 1st round pick who is supposed to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense. I think that's a huge red flag. Furthermore, this is the same thing we talked about with Javonte Williams. There's just a ton of competition in that wide receiver room and the running back room. Melvin Gordon and Javonte are going to split snaps. They're going to be, they're not nobodies when it comes to pass catching, so I think they'll be involved in regards to that. KJ Hamler, Courtland Sutton are obviously both really good wide receivers. You have 2 tight ends there who are great pass catching options, and Albert Okwuegbunam, who's an athletic freak. I believe the hype on Okwuegbunam. I think he will take that step. And then they also drafted Greg Dulcich out of UCLA, pretty high on him as well. And even though Tim Patrick did go down with injury, there's just there's a lot of stuff to go around. There's only so much pie of offense production, and it can't be split between the 7 people that I just named and have them all be, top end fantasy assets. And again, I'll continue on my train, stand on my soapbox of the regression of the Broncos, especially when it comes to Russell Wilson. I don't think last year was an aberration. People were, chalking it up to the injury on his finger. I don't think that was entirely the reason for his decline in performance. I think he truly is, on the back half of his career. I think that's a sign of what is to come. And I think even though, and this is more applicable to Jerry Jeudy than it is to Javonte Williams, but I made the same point with Javonte. A bad quarterback brings down the offense as a whole. I think Russ isn't the upgrade that everyone thinks he is. I think he isn't going to have that great of a season. I think he'll bring on the offense, and ultimately that will cap the ceiling for both Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, but primarily for Jerry Jeudy. And then the final thing that I really want to mention about Jerry Jeudy is that, listen, he's a great athlete, but he just doesn't really create separation. There was 2 games last year with 0 targets, and that was a product of his not being able to separate from the defenders and not being able to really put himself in a position for catching the ball. And you could say, yes, it's because he had a terrible quarterback. Teddy Bridgewater was scared to throw the ball in there. Drew Lock didn't have the arm strength to throw it to Jerry Jeudy. Yes, but even with these high-end wide receivers, we're looking at guys who can put up production even with bad quarterbacks. I mean, Terry McLaurin has been the absolute bottom of the barrel quarterbacks. No one has had it worse than Terry McLaurin, and yet he still continues to be a top fantasy asset and puts up games regularly over 20 points. So the fact that Jerry Jeudy can't do that, even with a halfway decent quarterback, is really, really scary to me. And listen, Jerry Jeudy, for the upside, if he slips in that 6th, 7th round, recently did a best ball draft where he did slip to the 7th round, and I was like, hey, listen, he's going to have a few bomb games. So I'll scoop him up there, but top 4, like I mentioned in the landmines video, you're trying to build that core of consistent production and guys who really achieve their ceilings. Jerry Jeudy is not that kind of guy for me. Last fantasy sleeper that needs to go to bed, this is going to be a hot take because I know there's a lot of love around him, is JuJu Smith-Schuster. Same as Jerry Jeudy, he's another injury-prone wide receiver. Look at last year, he had a season-ending injury after week 6, and we don't know how he's going to bounce back. We don't know how he's going to recover from that injury. Also, he just hasn't replicated that fantasy darling season of 2018. I don't know if he's going to be. He's really riding off the laurels of that one season where he was a wide receiver 2 behind Antonio Brown. He really shrank when he was a wide receiver 1. The following season after Antonio Brown was traded to Oakland, and obviously the seasons after, he dealt with injury. Deontay Johnson stepped up. They drafted Chase Claypool. The Steelers didn't have confidence in him, and if the Steelers don't have confidence in him, and who I personally believe is the best coach in the league, Mike Tomlin, couldn't make it work for him. I'm not saying Andy Reid is a bad coach. I love Andy Reid. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, in my opinion. But those are huge red flags coming out of the Steelers camp that I don't know how it's going to rectify itself on the Chiefs offense this year. And furthermore, I think he has an issue dealing with pressure. I think he has an issue, up here, being a wide receiver 1. Obviously, he shrank when it came down to after Antonio Brown left, and he was supposed to have this huge fantasy season. He was abysmal. He, had drops, had issues with drops, couldn't bring himself to, had tons of touchdown regression and couldn't find himself staying on the field. He didn't put up much of a fight when Deontay Johnson passed him on the depth chart. He didn't put up much of a fight when Chase Claypool was drafted. He just doesn't have the mentality of a wide receiver 1 that I would expect out of someone of his talent level, and that's a huge red flag for me. I know I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not trying to, analyze JuJu's mentality, but I'm just telling you what I see as a fan. And another reason, let's go back to actual cold hard facts here. Just follow the money. He only signed a 1-year deal. Listen, they signed Marcus Valdes-Scantling for 3 years, $36 million, which means they signed him for longer. They signed him for more total money, and MVS has a higher total annual paycheck than JuJu. Just follow the money. They have more confidence in MVS than JuJu, so I can only imagine that they're going to have him again more involved in the offense because that's where their larger investment lies. Moving down, there's also tons of competition at wide receiver. They signed MVS. Mecole Hardman is still there. Obviously, he already has rapport with Patrick Mahomes. They drafted Sky Moore, and they obviously have a ton of usage for Sky Moore planned. Andy Reid's come out saying he's going to be a big part of this offense. Also, outside of that, Travis Kelce is the best tight end in the league. He's going to get over 1,000 yards this year. Blake Bell, I think, is an up-and-coming tight end. Big fan of his. Also, they have a pretty crowded running back room. Obviously, the hype train on Isiah Pacheco is out of control. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still there. Ronald Jones, Jerick McKinnon. There's just so many pieces to this offense that it's hard for me to say, okay, JuJu's going to get enough of that pie to be productive. And I know that's been kind of a consistent theme throughout this is sleepers who their ADP is out of control, but they're still sharing it with a ton of offensive weapons across many different skill positions that I don't think any one of them is going to find enough opportunity or production or touches to sustain, top-end fantasy relevance. And I will say, last point, started off this way, we're going to end this way. Vacated targets go to the running back. I get it. Tyreek Hill's gone. Byron Pringle's gone. Not Mecole. Demarcus Robinson's gone as well. So there's a ton of vacated targets there. But listen, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a pass-catching back. He was literally vouched for by Patrick Mahomes because of his pass-catching ability. Historically, that he already has a rapport with Patrick Mahomes. So I believe that, a lot of those running backs between Jerick McKinnon, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, even Pacheco is going to sop up a lot of those vacated targets. And my hot take this year, I think I've said this before, but I'll reiterate it again. Not a single Chiefs wide receiver will have over 600 receiving yards, despite Patrick Mahomes throwing for over 4,000 yards. Ideally, it pans out. Travis Kelce, 1,100 yards. Blake Bell, 500 600 yards. Between Mecole, MVS, JuJu, and Sky Moore, they all have 500 to 600. And then another 800 passing yards goes to Pacheco, Jerick McKinnon, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That's going to get Mahomes over 4,000 yards with not a single Chiefs wide receiver being even close to fantasy relevant. So that's my hot take for this year. I'm standing behind it. I will tweet it out. I will retweet it at the end of the season, and I will admit it if I'm wrong, but that's the soapbox I'm willing to die on. So those are my 5 fantasy sleepers that need to go back to bed. Honorable mention, while we're talking about it, Isiah Pacheco. Listen, the hype train is out of control. He's sleeping up. Obviously, he's not in this particular auto draft because this was before the hype train started, rising really high. But I've seen him go in drafts higher than Tyler Algier. He's creeping up into, that 9th, 10th round, even in redraft leagues, which is crazy to me just because Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still there. He's still listed as a RB1 on the depth charts, even at training camp. Listen, I understand that Isiah Pacheco was running during the first preseason game. He was running with the first team, but as training camp has gone on, we have seen Pacheco still slot into that RB2, RB3 role, running with the second and third stringers, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the only one that has consistently still taken first string snaps. So my hype on Clyde Edwards-Helaire has inversely driven down how I feel about Isiah Pacheco. I think the hype train has gone out of control. I cannot stomach his ADP currently. And even if they're going to utilize him, it's going to be a committee backfield. It's not going to be, a ton of usage for Isiah Pacheco. I think best case scenario, he gets 30% of the touches out of the backfield. You still have Che, Ronald Jones, who I know could be cut, but he's still there at the time being. Still looking at Jerick McKinnon, who was utilized down the playoff stretch last year. And even Andy Reid has come out and said Sky Moore will be utilized out of the backfield as well, given his skill set. So I don't think that there's going to be enough there to really justify drafting Pacheco, where he is currently skyrocketing up the draft board. Again, same thing that I mentioned with Tony Pollard. I'd much rather take, Dameon Pierce, Tyler Algier, these guys who have much less impediments to being in the RB1 spot and taking over a higher volume of touches. So sorry for another downer episode. We'll bounce back next week or in a few days with a more positive episode.